Hello, guys. Once again, welcome to episode 4 of Bobcat Corner. I am your host, Stephen Vitt. And yeah, as you can see here, I'm just having this low key kind of show where I do talk about college sports, mainly about college football, but I can toss in other college sports as well here and there. So today's topic, which is not an urgent topic, but in the case of conference realignment, you guys never know what's going to happen when it comes to that. So, as I reported last week in episode 3, UMass, University of Massachusetts, they joined the MAC conference, the Mid American Conference, for all sports. And they were previously part of the MAC from 2012 to 2015, which obviously did not go so well. But UMass has decided to rejoin as a full time member in the MAC starting in 2025. And with that said, I do want to bring to your attention the fact that UMass is joining the MAC as the 13th member. That is an odd number of teams. So, what does that mean? It means that eventually the conference has to even out. And that is really the main topic that I want to discuss here in this episode as far as expansion candidates for the MAC. Now, obviously, we're not going to confuse the MAC with power conferences like the Big Ten and SEC for obvious reasons. But it is interesting to note where things are going to go. It's interesting to keep an eye on which universities go where as far as conference realignment goes, and even low key when it comes to the G5 or G whatever number you want to give them. Uh, those lower level conferences, it's also interesting to note how they're going to handle this, which universities they are able to bring in, and obviously which universities are going to be on their way out. In the case of the MAC, they have been historically a pretty stable conference in the grand scheme of things. And definitely in the case of football, you don't hear much of a peep about the MAC, and definitely not negative. Um, whereas, you hear some rumblings here about Conference USA, how there's so much, turnover there, so many universities come and go from that conference. And even to other extents, the Mountain West Conference and the American Athletic Conference, they have, quite a bit of a turnover rate of teams coming and going. And, but you don't hear that very much from the MAC. And I believe there's a pretty good reason for that. But anyway, I want to go through a list of potential candidates for that 14th slot in the MAC, and not just that, but also other slots that the MAC could fill for further expansion, depending on how many more universities they want to bring in. We don't know that number exactly. For all we know, it could be 3 more members. It could be a 16-team conference. The MAC could be. We don't know. Again, you don't know how conference realignment is going to go. And also, I will bring your attention to a link to an article that I have stumbled upon that was posted at the very end of February, the 28th, and it was talking about this very thing. Potential candidates to join UMass in the expansion of the MAC. I will provide that link down below, so you guys can check that out whenever you want. But here in this video, I just want to go through a list that I've come up with of potential candidates for universities that may want to consider joining the MAC. Now, being as it may, it's a G5 conference, the MAC. So you're not going to get like the highest payout in terms of the college football playoff and things like that. And a big part of this driving force for conference realignment is, of course, economics, the money. As I always say in the chat boxes of these college football videos, follow the money. And there's a good reason why I keep saying that. But anyway, here is a list of candidates that I've come up with personally. And they're not all of them are necessarily, the best or ideal fits for the MAC. and the likelihood of all of these, you know, candidates really giving the MAC consideration for joining them, you know, the likelihood isn't all that great. Definitely not for all of these schools I'm going to mention here. But I do think with this list, they're worth mentioning. They're worth talking about. I do believe these names are worth putting on the discussion table for talking about. Okay, if you're the MAC, which school or schools do you want to target for expansion? If you could at least talk to them, that's at least the context that we're going with here. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, first of all, let's start with University of Connecticut, UConn. That was one of the first names that came to my mind after hearing about the news about UMass joining. And, you know, University of Connecticut, it's a big brand name. Generally speaking, it is. And the biggest part about that is the success that UConn has had as a basketball school. It is primarily a basketball school because of its overwhelming success in both men's and women's basketball. That can't be stated enough about UConn basketball in general. So it's definitely a basketball school. So if the MAC were to get UConn for all sports, not just football, but for all sports, that would be such a huge boost to the profile of the MAC as a basketball conference. And for football, it would make sense for UConn to just swallow their pride, so to speak, and just join the MAC. Because ultimately, if you're an independent, and this is a message to Notre Dame as well, I'm going to get to that Notre Dame UConn talk in a minute here. If you're an independent, eventually you got to realize that you have to join a conference. You can't stay on the fence forever and expect everything to just go hunky dory or everything's good because we say so. No, you're not living in reality if you're going to think that. So, in the case of UConn, they're currently an independent. They were part of the American Athletic Conference for a few years, and they got out of that conference because they didn't feel like it was a good fit for them. And as you know, last summer, UConn, they were in on and off again conversations with the Big 12 about joining that conference. But that final confirmation call, that final confirmation never came. And ultimately, as you saw in August, the Big 12 went ahead and added the four corner schools of the pack, which was Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. UConn was not factored into that. So I truly hold this belief that UConn is just a pawn in the game for the Big 12, that they're being used by the Big 12 for leverage on any given day, and I'm hoping that UConn realizes that. And honestly, guys, UConn's performance on the football field just doesn't match up with what the Big 12 is looking for. The main driving point economically is football. You can you can talk about how good your basketball program is, and rightfully so for UConn, but if your football performance is not good enough, guess what? You're not going to be worth that investment overall. You're just not. So if we're to believe that football is the main driving force for economic gains, then the Big 12 is not going to get UConn. I'm just going to say it right now. Big 12 will not get UConn. And I don't think they're all that serious to get UConn. So with that in mind, if you're UConn, you have to realize that you have to understand where you sit at the table and just swallow your pride and consider joining the MAC. And is that likely? I don't think so. I don't think UConn will do it, but it is an interesting topic to talk about. UConn and the MAC. That is an interesting topic. I'll give it that much. So anyway, let's go down the list some more. Um, Marshall, Sun Belt Conference. Currently in the Sun Belt, Marshall Thundering Herd, they were in the MAC for a little bit of time, and they'd be a welcome addition. It'd be great to have Marshall rejoin the MAC. And geographically, they fit. They would be a great brand to build around. Marshall, Thundering Herd, We Are Marshall, all that. You know, it would make sense travel wise to have Marshall in the geographic footprint of the map. But the likelihood of it, I'm not sure. I have serious questions and doubts about that. But it would be nice to have Marshall in there back in the MAC. That'd be great. So as time goes along, guys, I will talk more about these candidates. But I've just got to give you a basic rundown because I don't want this going on too long. So others to consider, and these two have been really talked about for MAC expansion: Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee State. Now, those two have been really closely linked together when it comes to MAC expansion. They were talking about it for years. It did not happen. But now, in light of UMass joining, you could see either and or Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee, stepping up and saying, "Hey, we're going to do it. We're going to join the MAC now." It could happen. Likelihood is somewhat there, I'd say safely. And if I had to choose one of them, I guess I would choose Western Kentucky, the Hilltoppers. They have had, decent, you know, level of play on the football field lately. So they would warrant that investment, Western Kentucky. Middle Tennessee, maybe not so much in comparison, but I'm not going to count them out. So other candidates, possibly. I'm only saying possibly. I'm not guaranteeing anything. Um, you do have to start looking at, you know, other options that are not exactly, upfront. And one name that comes to my mind would be Appalachian State. Now, likelihood of that, probably not likely, but it does warrant the conversation. Appalachian State, located in Boone, North Carolina, I believe. They're in the Sun Belt right now, and they have had pretty decent success lately. So I wouldn't mind seeing Appalachian State in the MAC. That'd be a wonderful addition if you really think about it. You know, I live here in the foothills of the Appalachia, so welcoming in a you know a, a university like Appalachian State, that would make so much sense if you really think about it. But I'm not sure how likely that is. So going down the list here, you do need to start factoring in maybe the possibility of FCS level schools making that jump and paying that $5 million fee to join the FBS level of competitive football. And certain universities, I'm just going to, mention real fast here, would be the following. The Dayton Flyers, geographically speaking, they do fit in the MAC. But on the other hand, would it be too much to put so many teams in the state of Ohio? As much as I am an, Ohio and Ohio sports fan, would that be too much? That's up for debate. But Dayton Flyers, that has been talked about as a possible expansion candidate for the MAC. And another one would be Youngstown State. Same issue there, state of Ohio. But Youngstown State, the Penguins, they have had some success on the FCS level, and they might want to, make that jump. Although there's been hesitation about that in recent years for obvious reasons, economics, and you're going to hear this a lot from me, guys, about economics and what's going on. Many universities are trying to cut back now because of economics. They may cut out some sports. So, considering that, I don't know if Youngstown State is going to be really willing to do that, to make that jump to the FBS level. Remains to be seen. So, another school that's not being talked about from the FCS level to the FBS level, possibly, that could make sense to join the MAC. How about Villanova? The Villanova Wildcats. I'm just going to put that out there. Much like UConn, Villanova has a great brand of basketball. Historically, they've been a great basketball school. Football, um, they're not initially known as a football school, but as I've checked their records, the record books about Villanova football, they're not that bad. Villanova really isn't that bad of a football program on the FCS level. Now, if they were to make the jump to the FBS level, we'll see how it goes. But Villanova's in a pretty good market, around the Philadelphia area market. So don't tell me they cannot recruit certain athletes to get to a Philadelphia area school like Villanova. It could work, could. And also Albany, the Albany Great Danes. They currently play in the Colonial uh, Conference, just like Villanova in the FCS level. Now, nobody's talking about Albany, good reason, but Albany, New York is a good market. It's highly populated enough, I think, to possibly make that jump to the FBS level. Now, would they do it? Likelihood, probably not that likely. But again, worth having the conversation. It's worth tossing around in a Q&A session, so to speak, about Albany. Maybe they could, have that talk about jumping to the FBS level and joining the MAC. Because there again, guys, the issue here is that you got to give UMass a travel partner, a legitimate travel partner. Villanova and Albany, UConn, they all could fit that profile of a good travel partner for UMass. That's all I'm saying. So also maybe, and this is like way out there in the distance, but I'm just going to bring it up. The University of Maine. Yes, I said Maine. The Maine Black Bears. They also play in the Colonial Conference on the FCS level. And their location, as far as that goes, the traveling, again, UMass needs a travel partner. Even if you get Maine convinced to, make that jump, you could make it work. You know, I watched an interesting video like a few weeks ago about, you know, that there is this proposed Northeastern Conference, which never got off the ground. Just the concept of it. And I did find it interesting that could be maybe that could be the play for the MAC going forward, that they could venture out northeast a little bit more. That might be the right play to make because nobody's really talking about northeastern schools when it comes to conference realignment, unless you're talking about like Syracuse or Boston College. I might get to them in a minute. So yeah, Maine, as quirky as that might sound, they might foot the bill if you can get them in the right situation, which likelihood not that likely, but just talk about it. And the last FCS school I want to talk about real fast, Marist. They play in the Pioneer Conference along with Dayton on the FCS level, and they would make a good travel partner in theory with UMass. They are located in, I hope I'm getting this right, Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm gonna have to really study that one. Poughkeepsie, New York, and the population isn't that bad if you check it out on Wikipedia. So just consider that Marist. I have studied Marist University off and on here, and they seem like they would be that kind of fit for a Mac kind of culture, Mac kind of environment. If they were to make that jump to the FBS, which I'm not hearing any reports about it, and likelihood is not like it's not up there at all. But if Marist ever thought about it, they could, economically speaking, if they get enough help, they could make it work. So just certain things like that you got to think about. You never know. And one last thing, I mentioned it, Syracuse and Boston College. This is a big if because you don't know how it's going to shake out here, but the ACC is in trouble. That is going to be a topic for a later time on this show, but ACC as a conference is in trouble, and within these next few years, guys, I don't see them lasting, especially by 2030. I just do not see the ACC lasting all that long. And if they survive, they're not going to be what they are now. So you might want to start looking at Syracuse and Boston College, those schools specifically, as possibly, in context, making a jump down from a power conference to a G5 like MAC, like the MAC. It may happen considering everything going on with economics, how it's all fluctuating. Just keep that in mind. So, yeah, I just want to wrap it up. I've been going on for quite a bit here. So, I just want to toss it out there. I'm going to link you to that one article about MAC expansion candidates. And if you guys want to just start the conversation, what's really realistic and what's not so realistic as far as expansion candidates go for the MAC as a conference, as a football conference, and all sports. Just let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys are enjoying this content that I'm putting out, and you guys have a good day. Stay safe. Take care. Thanks.